In this video, I'm going to show you how I use the Advanced Stylized Material with characters. This has probably been one of the most requested videos since I released the shader pack. So I picked 3 very different character examples from Fab to showcase its features and cover most of the use cases you may run into. And actually, it really doesn't matter what kind of characters you're working with, whether it's an already stylized low poly model with, simple flat colors, or a character with this beautiful hand-painted textures, or even a complex fully PBR one. Anyway, I'll show you the setup process, some useful tricks, and all the things I usually do to get the most out of the material, like, custom hair color. So that said, I'm assuming you've already watched the previous videos where I cover all the features in detail, because in this one we are going to focus specifically on preparing character meshes and making them work properly with the shader. Alright, let's get into it. So let's take a look at the first example. So I have this little character that I picked from this pack. It's been created by IT Happy Studio. They deliver lots of stylized characters, props, and so on. So really great pack. And I chose this character specifically because it comes with, this jumping animation, so you can always preview how your material looks like while the character is animated. Okay. Alright, so let's take a look at how this character is created. So first of all, you see that it's built with separate mesh pieces like trousers, shirt, helmet is all separate, and we are lucky because this way we can apply a different material instance for each object. So in case you would like to change the shirt like properties, like maybe some pattern, colors, whatever, you can do that. It's not baked into the single texture. It's all modular, and yeah, it's always good to have like this setup. So now let's take a look at the material itself, and you will find that the entire pack, not only this character, but the entire pack uses a single shader. That's the simplest you can get. It uses only a single one texture. That's this like a whole color spectrum, whatever. So it's probably because it works on mobile, it's the cheapest way you can go. Yeah, but we will now keep adding new features, new visual stuff to that. So that's exactly what I did. I created a bunch of material instances out of the unlit version of the material, so it doesn't react to any lighting, and all the effects are calculating within the shader. Like for instance, if I rotate the directional light, you see the cell shaded look is changing. Alright, so the first material instance uses this texture that the original material has with some properties. Like Fresnel is quite high, so we got this little fall off here, and all other material instances are based on this material, so we don't have to specify everything from scratch. And it's also great because they share the same settings across other material instances. So like I said, this material separation gives us the flexibility we need. For instance, I have a separate material instance for the shirt, but now I can apply a different one and change the color or add some pattern. So let's take a look at that. It also uses the same texture, but I'm using the color tint, and I can now pick any color I want, or actually almost any, since it uses the original color, which is blue, and now it multiplies with this color. So I'm not basically able to have a pure yellow here. Of course, I always could disable the color map and, pick a color I wanted, which is unaffected by texture, but I still decided to keep the color map on because it has details like the darker color and so on. And then we have detail layer that I enabled. It uses this simple circular pattern that is tiled. And what's cool about this shader, it doesn't have, you don't need to have like object UVs. Like in this case, the object UVs are squeezed to a pixel in order to sample a single color. So it wouldn't be possible to have any pattern other than just a projection. Of course, you can of course swap to a different texture and so on, but you already know that. All right, so the next thing, what I did is I took one of the material templates that are included with the pack, so you can find them in the Advanced Material example pack. And I believe I chose the stylized metal, but in this case it's lit because I wanted to have this specular highlight, and the shader can actually react to scene lighting. Unless you don't want that, but you can always pick the unlit version as well. But what's cool about this workflow is you can actually pick any template. You can play around with these and and actually start from this template that says like a base or foundation. So I believe I took this, and yes, I changed the color, maybe a detail layer scale and whatever, so you get the idea. And same goes with the shoes. I also went with the default one, because when you have a default lit version, you get access to reflection parameter, which kinda gives you this shininess feature. It's like adding a bit of a roughness and metallic altogether to get this stylized look. So I think that it gives you a nice touch to this object. Of course, you can change now color, whatever, but yeah, you get the idea. I also used my stylized glass material that comes from a separate pack, but you can always use the one here, but I wanted to have like a semi-translucent one with this stylized reflection. So let me show you what I mean. So if we have like a plane, if I apply a glass, you see this is like a screen space projected reflection. So I believe that it works with this character. And of course there are other effects that are added to this character that are unrelated to shaders itself. So like post-process material that uses outline. You see it adds a bit of an inner outline. I'm using also a really simple overlay material. And overlay material is a quite new system in Unreal that allows to use the same mesh and apply additional shader on top of that. So it's used for things like outlines or some, highlights and so on. You can actually create yourself the same shader I have here. So you need to change the blend mode to masked and shading model to unlit, and make sure it's double-sided so you can have access to two-sided node. And of course, it's not the perfect way to add outlines, because if it's like thick enough, you can start seeing some artifacts, but I think for the most part, it does the job very, very well. And the last thing that I did is I use my background creator that has this neat feature, fake shadow. You see that it kind of like drops the old school Photoshop drop shadow effect. So you can always, have this little detail on top of character. So let's take a look at the second character now.
Okay, the second character, and let's be completely honest, already looks amazing.
It's from studio Just Create, and they have a bunch of other stylized assets and fabs, so definitely check them out. And honestly, if you're into this kind of style, the character is basically finished already. It has some beautiful hand-painted textures, nice material definition, proper normal maps. Everything works really well out of the box. But for this example, I really wanted to push it towards, a flatter, more cel-shaded look and completely remove the influence of realistic scene lighting. And now, if you preview it in a darker, more realistic environment like this office, you will immediately see what I mean compared to the original version. Okay, now, if we open up the skeletal mesh, you'll notice that this character is built a bit differently than the previous one. So instead of a separate mesh parts, everything is combined into a single mesh with 3 material IDs assigned to different regions. Technically, we could reuse the same workflow as before, for example masking out the scarf or parts of the clothing to recolor them inside the material, but this time I wanted to try something different. So I decided to separate the hair into its own material so we're no longer dependent on the original color texture and have full control over reflections and shading. So the process itself isn't very complicated, but this does require extra steps. So first, export the skeletal mesh and open up in any DCC package. And I'm using Blender here, but honestly any modeling software will work. Then select all the hair geometry and assign it to a new material slot. And of course, technically we could stop here, export the mesh and re-import it in Unreal, but I wanted to push it a bit further. What I did is I exported the entire head together with the hair in order to generate a smooth AO bake that I could later use inside the material instance as a gradient mask. And the reason I included the head is of course important, because without it the AO bake wouldn't receive proper self-shadowing from underneath the hair and the result would look inaccurate. You know, it's a small detail, but all these little things add up. I also masked the hair separately by exporting the UV layout and overlaying on top of the bake, so that way I knew that the gradient only affected the areas I actually needed. Although to be fair, this was part of my early test before I added the extra material ID, so this particular step is optional now since the hair already has its own material anyway. Alright, so once everything is set up correctly, you can now officially steal Zach Parrish's hair shading look. Finally, we have the last character example. And here, I really wanted to push all the effects to the maximum and see how it looks with a strong rim lights or fake reflections, completely getting rid of this typical PBR look. So this character uses only a single material for the entire body, so we're kinda limited to the colors already available in the color map. But luckily we have a few other examples we can try and see which color theme works best with the shader. And remember, the strong rim light can also dramatically change the overall look and feel of the character, so definitely play around with the settings and see what works best for your scene. As for the mesh, the only thing I did was to separate the classes and assign them to a new material slot. And once again, this gives us a more control over the translucency when it's needed. Now, if you take a look at the original mesh on the left, you'll notice that the hair uses a material with an opacity mask. This, of course, allows for much more detailed hair strands. However, to make this work with the stylized shaders, we need to make a small adjustments and small changes, because by default, opacity masks aren't supported. So open up any master material, and in my case, I'm editing the unlit version. Now let's go ahead and change the blend mode from opaque to mask. Then you can add a texture parameter and static switch param. So this actually allows you to decide which material instances have access to the opacity masks. Of course, alternatively, you can just duplicate the master material and use this setup only when it's actually needed. Anyway, now if you open up the hair material, you'll see a new checkbox, the one that we just added. And once you enable it, you can load your opacity mask and quickly compare how the hair looks with or without the mask. Alright guys, that's pretty much everything I wanted to show you. I really hope now you have a better idea of how to fine-tune your materials and get the most out of your characters. Just remember to experiment with the settings and make use of any textures or masks available to you. So that said, good luck with your projects, and I can't wait to see some games using this shader pack. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.